सर अपन भी हो सकते हैं वो
मतलब फोन करून पण मला बोलली होतं मगाशी लावली होती
तुम्ही करा ना मी त्यांचा डायरेक्ट
हो हो करतो
तुम्ही वरतीच राहता का तिकडे
Due to COVID pandemic, several colleagues which were going to assist us, they are in home and they are not in a position to join us. That's why I and my one friend, Dr. Lokesh Kumar Nandeshwar, he is there, and we are just looking after the technology and all things. That's why we are getting late. But though late, we are going to start our international webinar. So as I mentioned earlier, to mark this event of Dr. Ambedkar's 130th birth anniversary, the Department of Dr. Ambedkar Thought and Department of Cultural Activities of our college have organized this one-day international webinar. And it gives me an immense pleasure to welcome you all in this international webinar. The inaugurator of today's webinar, Honorable Officiating Vice Chancellor of Gondwana University, Gadchiroli, Dr. Shriram Kawade, sir. The chairperson of the webinar, Honorable Dr.Devesh Kamble, sir. Secretary, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Education Society, Chanda, Bramhapuri. And writer and honorable member of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Education Society, Dipankar Kamble ji. Respected participants, we have among us eminent resource persons of today's international webinar, Dr. Scott Stroud from University of Texas at Austin, USA. He will deliver his keynote address on the topic Dr. Ambedkar's what is new in Dr. Ambedkar's Buddhism and in his pragmatism. And another resource person is there, Damini Kain ma'am, and she will address on the topic. Yes. Dr. Ambedkar's Constitution. Hello. As I mentioned, as just two people we are here looking after this webinar, we are getting lots of troubles. I think our inaugurator, Dr. Kawade sir, has not joined yet. Sir, YouTube ची live माझ्या याला जा email ला. Hello. I would like to welcome them for accepting our invitation and thank you all for joining this webinar. My name is Tufan Autade, Organizing Secretary of this webinar. Once again, I welcome you all on behalf of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar College of Arts, Commerce and Science, Bramhapuri, Maharashtra, India. I request all the participants that if you want to ask question, kindly post your questions in chat box. Question answer session will be conducted after each speech. Now I call upon Mr. Dipankar Kamble, writer and honorable member of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Education Society, Chanda, to deliver an introductory speech. Mr. Dipankar Kamble.
Hello. Hello.
You are audible.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes, yes. So Jai Bhim to all the viewers and happy Ambedkar Bhim Jayanti to all. So I'll not be speaking much because Damini has her exam and I don't want to be an impediment between the speakers and the audience. So I'll just talk few things like like when Professor Stroud came to Nagpur at Department of Ambedkar Thoughts, I had my exams that day at National Law University. So I wanted to hear to attend his lecture, but I couldn't because when I left from the university, professor's lecture was almost over when I reached Ambedkar Thoughts department. So I think today is the opportunity to listen to his views on the pragmatism of Dr. Ambedkar. And Damini is a dear friend of mine from Delhi. She is an amazing person, an amazing activist. She is editor of The Center magazine, and she has also contested the USU presidential election. She was a presidential candidate. So I'll wish everyone a happy Bhim Jayanti, and I will not be an impediment between the speakers and the audience. So I pass on the mic to Tufan Avtare, sir.
Thanks, Dipankar. One thing I should make it clear that our inaugurator, he is on the way. He is trying to join. He is in search of net with his car, but he is not getting. He is not letting in. So when he will join, we will have his speech, inaugural speech. So
Sure.
before
that, we can ask Damini because she has to go. She has her exam. Right?
Yes, Damini ma'am. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll start. Jabin to everyone.
No, no. Damini ma'am, please. Basically, what we did, as a procedure, introduction of each speaker was given to our some faculties, but as they are unwell because of COVID-19 pandemic, so just I need to introduce you first. Damini Kain is currently pursuing Masters in Political Science from Hindu College, University of Delhi. She has been selected for the upcoming batch of prestigious LAMP, that stands for Legislative Assistant to Member of Parliament Fellowship. She has presented her research papers in both national and international conferences, one of which was awarded a research grant from Women's Fund as Asia. She regularly writes on themes of socio-political importance, and her works have been covered by Almanac London, The Wire, The First Post, and others. Apart from research, she has participated in students' activism. She stood for the post of president in 2019 Delhi University Students' Union elections, which is India's largest student election. And her campaign was covered in all prominent national dailies, including the Hindu, the Indian Express, and the Times of India. I welcome you, ma'am, in this webinar. And she is going to deal with the topic Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and the Constitution of India. Ma'am.
Jabin to everyone, and I'll now begin. Today is an extremely special day, and it should be special for everyone who believes in the basic fundamental values of equality, liberty, and fraternity, irrespective of their caste, class, gender, or nationality. And on this special occasion of the 130th birth anniversary of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, I feel honored to be invited in this event conducted by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar College of Arts, Commerce and Science, Brahmapuri, Maharashtra, India. And Ambedkar's activism, socio-political thought, and academics spans across the disciplinary boundaries, and we have seen him doing extraordinary work in fields of economics, in law, as a jurist, in the making of the Constitution of India, as a feminist thinker, in journalism, and as a political leader. But in today's event, I'll be restricting myself to talk about Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's ideas and activism and intellectual vigor in the field of constitution making, specifically to the Constitution of India. Um, Dr. Ambedkar delivered a remarkable speech, which was also his last speech in the Constituent Assembly on 25 November 1949. In that famous speech, he upheld the values of equality, liberty, and fraternity. In doing so, he marked about the importance of constitutional morality. And in that speech, he quotes Grote for that. And I'll like to quote him again. Ambedkar quotes Grote in order to emphasize on constitutional morality, and he says, by constitutional morality, Grote meant a paramount reverence for the forms of the Constitution, enforcing obedience to authority and acting under and within these forms, yet combined with the habit of open speech, of action subject only to definite legal control, and unrestrained censure of the very authorities as to all the public acts combined, to with a perfect confidence in the bosom of every citizen amidst the bitterness of party contest that the forms of constitution will not be less secret in the eyes of his opponents or than his own. So what Grote talks about constitutional morality is the fact that we need to follow the principles of the constitution. But Ambedkar meant something more and something else. For him, constitutional morality referred to the conventions and protocols that govern decision making where the constitution vests discretionary power is silent. So even when the constitution is not talking about something, we have a constitutional morality to follow, and that should be our basis for making decisions after that. Because as Ambedkar mentioned, constitution is written and is a product of a certain generation, of a certain age. But the constitution moves, and India's constitution is a living constitution, and it develops over time. And how it develops really depends on us, really depends on the people, those who are managing it. So, in this regard, and in the very same speech, which is popularly known as the grammar of anarchy speech, Ambedkar cautions us about the limits of the constitution if it goes into wrong hands. He says, because I feel, however good a constitution may be, it is sure to turn out bad because those who are called to work it happen to be a bad lot. However bad a constitution may be, it may turn out to be good if those who are called to work it happen to be a good lot. The working of a constitution does not depend wholly upon the nature of the constitution. The constitution can provide only the organs of the state, such as the legislature, the executive, and judiciary. The factors on which the working of these organs of the state depends are the people and the political parties they will set up as the instruments to carry out their wishes and their politics. So it really depends on the people, on the ruling regime, on those who are managing the constitution, because constitution again is an institutional structure which is provided. It carries the very important principles of managing ourselves, but again, it depends on the people, those who manage it. So, as a brief introduction about the Constitution of India, I'll here mention few facts about it. The Indian Constitution was written over a period of 4 years by the Constituent Assembly, dominated by the Congress Party, then India's leading political organization. The Assembly sought to include a wide range of political opinions and represented diversity by sex, religion, caste, and tribe. This achievement is striking compared to the other states that were decolonized. Indians wrote the Indian Constitution, unlike most of the former British colonies like Kenya, Malaysia, Ghana, and Sri Lanka, whose constitutions were written by the British officials at Whitehall. The Indian Constitution is the longest surviving constitution in the post colonial world, and it continues to dominate public life in India. It is deemed to be a living constitution because of the fact that we can continue to make changes in it for the betterment of the society. In the same speech, uh, Ambedkar mentions about the crux of what he means by constitutional morality and why we need to adhere to constitution. And these words are extremely important for us to carry forward this legacy which Ambedkar has once given to us. He says, What does social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life. These principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity are not to be treated as separate items in a trinity. They form a union of trinity in the sense that to divorce one from the other is to defeat the very purpose of democracy. Liberty cannot be divorced from equality. Equality cannot be divorced from liberty, nor can liberty and equality be divorced from fraternity. Without equality, liberty would produce the supremacy of the few over the many. Equality without liberty would kill individual initiative. Without fraternity, liberty would produce the supremacy of the few over the many. Equality without liberty would kill individual initiative. Without fraternity, liberty and equality could not become a natural course of things. And he highlights the importance of social democracy as preceding political democracy. Because in a country which continues to be largely divided on caste lines, no amount of political democracy can be established without working on the social situations. In the famous grammar of Naki speech, which withholds the crux of constitutionalism in the country, social morality, he mentions this and he says, on the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will recognize the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In a social and economic life, we shall by reason of a social and economic structure continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live with these lives of contradictions? So, a question that he asked back then on 26 January 1950 in his last assembly speech is a question that we carry till date. And this is something that we're going to carry for generations because the constitution that we have embodies a wide range of principles and set of morality. But how do we make use of it really depends on us. It depends on the people, it depends on the political parties, it depends on the ground movements that we have to make to change the social structure of the country. And in these ground movements, a lot of Ambedkarite organizations from various disciplines, from various fields, from various age groups are working hard to uphold this constitutional morality. So when we talk about Dr. Ambedkar and the Constitution of India, we should remember both his cautions regarding the constitution, the limits to it, and how the constitution could be misused for certain in certain ways, and which we can see happening in today's India as well, and how we need to reclaim that constitution and uphold once again the principles with which Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar made this constitution. So I think what the kind of principles that we have embodied back then needs to be upheld today, and we really need to carry forward Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's legacy. And I'll end with this. And yeah, thank you so much for inviting me at the event, and Jai Bhim.
Thanks, ma'am. Now I call upon Dr. Elish Nandeshwar sir to conduct question answer session. If you want any question to Damini ma'am, you can ask. Santosh A. Kawade, he has raised his hand. If he want to ask, he can proceed. Dr. Kapilendra Das, you have raised your hand. Hello. Dr. Kawade sir, Dr. Shriram Kawade sir, I think on his way, net came and he just joined our webinar. So because of the connectivity problem,
Okay.
as per procedure, we are not going. So now I call upon Dr. Shriram Kawade sir to deliver his introductory speech.
A very good morning to all esteemed colleagues, participants, and friends, and a warm thank you to the Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar College of Art, Commerce, and Science, Brahmapuri, for inviting me to inaugurate a one-day international webinar on the occasion of 130th birth anniversary of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. The chairperson of the inaugural session, Dr.Devesh Kamble sir, secretary of the society, and principal Dr. Azizul Haq sir, Dr.Scott, Stroud, associate professor of communication studies, University of Texas, USA, who is going to present a keynote addresses on one of the fundamental and relatively untouched topic titled What is New in the Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's Buddhism and in His Pragmatism. Esteemed principals of various colleges affiliated to Gondwana University and all the teachers, researchers, those are connected virtually for this crucial international webinar. At the outset, it is my pleasure to formally inaugurate the international webinar and declare that the webinar is open for further deliberation on various crucial aspects of the contribution of Bharat Ratna Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, addressing and providing scientific thoughts on catalytic personalities like Dr. Ambedkar is truly one of the prime responsibilities of any higher education institution. I therefore congratulate Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar College of Art, Commerce and Science, Brahmapuri for organizing an international webinar on Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. It is my honor and privilege to address you all today as we celebrate the 130th birth anniversary of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. Ambedkar Jayanti is a unique occasion for all of us to proudly celebrate the genius of the father of the one great book, which is the foundation of India, the Constitution. Dr. Ambedkar's unparalleled contribution in the forming of our Constitution will always be recognized in the history of India. But we need to recognize also that his vision was welfare all. Dr. Ambedkar's contribution has not just limited as the father of Indian Constitution. In fact, he was contributed to all crucial aspects of human development and liberation, which has relevance to global context, and hence he is a Vishwaratna. I do not intend to stand in the way of the main speaker, however, put forth few words in the memory of great son of Indian soil, Dr. Babasaheb. A beacon of hope for the disadvantages in India as he is described by many. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was a stout opponent of injustice, discrimination of operations. Dr. Babas Ambedkar was also an intellectual, who did a PhD at London School of Politics and Economics on the problem of the rupees, which was 1923. He studied where right raging in later year he wrote on as, as political theory on Pakistan and in the final stages of his career on Buddhism. Clearly, he understood that building a world of greater justice require a full understanding of how this was to be done. In a sense, we anticipated a great political theorist who said the task of philosophy is not only to understand the world, the task of philosophy is to change the world. Once again congratulate the organizer specifically for inviting world-based scholars as a resource person. International webinar will be certainly made a major contribution to enhance understanding Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's thoughts and contribution in a holistic manner. However, to understand his philosophy, we need to understand Dr. Ambedkar fully. And when we want to pay homage to him, our homage, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, should be to take forward his work, the implementing the Indian Constitution as one of the most powerful instrument of peaceful social change in the world. I once again thank to authorities of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar College of Art, Commerce and Science for the opportunity to address you today. I wish the international webinar a great success. Jai Hind, Jai Bhim. Thank you.
Thank you, Kawade sir, for your inaugural speech. As Kawade sir has mentioned, we all are eager to hear Dr. Scott Stroud sir. And before that, if someone asks Damini ma'am, they can proceed. Dr. Kapilendra Das, he has, if he want to ask any question, he can proceed. So no questions are there. I think questions will be asked to Dr. Scott Stroud sir. So before inviting Scott Stroud sir, let me introduce him very briefly. Dr. Scott R. Stroud is an associate professor of communication studies at Moody College of Communication, the University of Texas at Austin, USA. He was president of American Society for the History of Rhetoric. He is the editor of Media Ethics. He is the author of 2 academic books, John Dewey and The Artful Life and Kant and The Promise of Rhetoric. Dr. Stroud is the co-founder of India's first Center for John Dewey Studies at Savitribai Phule, Pune University, Maharashtra, India. Currently, he is completing a book manuscript that tells the story of Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar's brush with Deweyan pragmatism at Columbia University during 1913 to 1916 and how it shaped his innovating pursuit of social justice in India. Now I request Dr. Scott Stroud sir to deliver his keynote address on the topic what is new in Dr. Ambedkar's Buddhism and in his pragmatism. Dr. Stroud sir.
All right, thank you, Tufan. Jai Bhim, everyone.
Jai
And thank you, Damini, for the wonderful speech on the Constitution. I learned a lot about that document, and I haven't even memorized every part of it because, like you said, it's the longest constitution in the world. So much to study about the Indian Constitution and Dr. Ambedkar. Tufan, if you can enable me to screen share, I've got a PowerPoint slideshow because sometimes I get boring. but perhaps my slides and pictures will keep even myself awake. It's midnight here in America.
Yes, I have make you co-host.
Okay, excellent. This is working here. You should see Babasaheb in 2 different outfits. So let me tell you over the next 40 minutes or so a little bit about my project. I am a philosopher by my highest training, and my specialty is in John Dewey, the American thinker. And something like 5 or 7 years ago, I got wind of Dr. Ambedkar's deep relationship with Babasaheb, and I started to try to figure out, how did these two know each other, relate to each other's thought? Did Ambedkar take pragmatism over to India, just like Hushur, a student right after Babasaheb left Columbia, took pragmatism to China and changed it and did things with it? So I started to look for answers to this, and people wrote an article here, a paragraph there. So I've been trying to do my share in contributing to this small body of literature that explains what the relationship between these two giants of thought were. And so today's talk, I want to give you the first time I've used a word. If you want to describe the type of Buddhism that Babasaheb pioneered, you'd call it Navayana Buddhism. If you want to put a label on what kind of pragmatism he has that's different from John Dewey's or William James, I suggest to you that we could call it, with some usefulness, Navayana pragmatism. So today I will talk about what's new in Dr. Ambedkar's Buddhism and what's new in his pragmatism. So we all know about this phrase from a 1952 letter he wrote to Savita, his wife back in India. And he wrote her that upon learning that John Dewey had died, on his way to the US, that he was sad, and that Babasaheb said, I owe my whole intellectual life to him. Now the question is, what does that mean? What kind of debt did he owe? He had so many original thoughts, yet he was so educated. How did the pragmatist portion fit into that educational scheme? We also I assume all of us are familiar with the Annihilation of Caste, that wonderful, powerful, undelivered speech. And you have this line in there where he overtly says, Professor John Dewey, who is my teacher and to whom I owe so much. So there's this interesting story there. What does Dr. Ambedkar think about John Dewey's philosophy? And what parts does he take out of it? So for instance, one of the things I will try to flesh out is that he takes from it this idea of social democracy and builds a new version of social democracy that John Dewey didn't even think about. And John Dewey didn't think much about Buddhism either. So the question is going to be, what does Navayana Buddhism add to this story of Ambedkar's relationship to John Dewey? So this quest has taken me years, excuse me, I went too fast there. This quest has taken me to India about 5 or 6 times over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. And it's been fascinating. I've met some of the nicest, most caring, most knowledgeable people I've ever met. And the most knowledgeable folks I've met about Babasaheb. And I've tried to get my hands on every book that I could find from that Dr. Ambedkar underlined in, or notebooks he made. I tried to look at all of these things and digest what Dr. Ambedkar was doing when he studiously engaged all of these sources. And this is going to hopefully give us a better idea of what his thought is, because his written works give you so much. Okay, there's so much more to a person than what they write down and publish. So this quest has taken me everywhere I could find the catches of books or notes from Dr. Ambedkar. Now, maybe some of you have this question. Maybe some of you are wondering, what is pragmatism? This is a fair question to ask. Many people in America that I talk to wonder, who is Ambedkar? So, we all know about traditions, and some traditions we can learn more about. So pragmatism is one of these traditions I think folks in India could be receptive to, and I hope more people in America also know about it as well. So, if I had to define it in 30 seconds, it's going to be the history of thought that encompasses figures in America after the American Civil War, such as Charles Saunders Peirce, William James, John Dewey, Jane Addams, and many more. And I want to convince my colleagues in America that when we think of all the people that have been influenced by pragmatism, Babasaheb is going to be one of those. Okay, they're all different. They all don't subscribe to the exact same thing, but they all are linked by some little small thread as part of this pragmatist story. So let me start telling part of that story at least. So back to the question at hand. How does Babasaheb stand next to John Dewey? Now, most people will put them right up next to each other and say, Ambedkar is like John Dewey. Or some of my critics say, no, Ambedkar went beyond John Dewey. But both of these kind of reactions make a simple mistake, a very simple mistake. Babasaheb wrote 22 volumes of work. What was Babasaheb's thought? It changed over time. It evolved. He talked about different things to different people. Okay, he changed his views on certain things like any complex thinker would. So it's hard for you to put your finger on what his thought on one simple issue always was. The same for John Dewey. John Dewey's collected works are over 40 volumes. It's weighed 100 kilograms or so. How do I know the weight of the knowledge contained? Because I put them all in my luggage when I traveled to Pune to start that Dewey Center. So I didn't want to trust these to the mail. So 38 volumes or 40 volumes, 8 million words in John Dewey. Babasaheb did not read all of this. Babasaheb did not hear all of it in class with John Dewey. So this is a simple mistake to think that John Dewey's thought is one thing and Babasaheb's either mirrors it or is totally different. What I want to look for and what I will try to present to you today is, or tonight in my case here in America, is the idea that Babasaheb's thought is very complex. And certain parts of that thought can be productively linked to certain things that he saw of value in Dewey. Not all of it in Dewey. So let's think back to John Dewey. If I had to explain to you what Dewey's pragmatism focused on, this is how I would probably do it in a nutshell. Dewey wants to argue that democracy matters, science is useful, unity is something you want to achieve and is a way to get there, and that education in school and outside of school is absolutely essential. And I have a feeling right now you could probably see certain resonances with these four themes in the thought of Babasaheb. India would be a much different country, I submit to you, if Ambedkar would have followed all the other Indians of his day and sought his education exclusively in Britain. Instead, he ended up in Columbia. Instead, he ended up with Dewey and other progressive-minded intellectuals in New York, and he got a certain American ethos. Part of that, not all of it, but part of it was due to pragmatism. So let's go back to Dewey on democracy. Dewey's question on democracy in a variety of places is startlingly consistent. Dewey asks this question: is democracy reducible to decision-making procedures like voting? Either you voting for leaders in Delhi, let's say, or the people in Delhi voting on certain policies. In America, it's the leaders we have in Washington, D.C. Dewey's answer was no. From his earliest days as a young professor in 1888, he wrote a nice essay, which I know Ambedkar had, called The Ethics of Democracy. And there he says, democracy in a word is a social, that is to say, an ethical conception. And upon its ethical significance is based its significance as governmental. Democracy is a form of government only because it's a form of moral and spiritual association. Then you look later in Dewey's writings, a book that Ambedkar loved so much that he not only had one copy of it, I found 3 copies of it at Siddharth Library. 2 of them are heavily annotated in Ambedkar's distinctive style of red or blue pencil. And then there's another copy of it, a later edition, at Malin College. I couldn't get my hands on it because it was behind a locked cabinet and they couldn't find the right key. But anyway, he owned at least 4 copies of Democracy and Education. Dr. Ambedkar did. So here's his underlinings from the 1916 edition he owned. And you recognize these lines from Annihilation of Caste. A democracy is more than a form of government, Dewey says. It is primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience. So this is something that always stuck with Ambedkar, and he built on it, he expanded it, he changed it. But the idea he and Dewey liked was that democracy was more than about politics in Delhi or in Washington. Later in Dewey's life, he writes in Creative Democracy, an essay I also have evidence that Ambedkar paid attention to and read, that democracy is a way of life. And it's something that influences and inflects how we treat each other. So for Dewey, if he was alive today, he would say democracy is how we treat each other on Twitter and on Facebook. as much as it is about Washington or Delhi and the politicians we elect. Now let's go back to 1913, where the story starts. Young Ambedkar stumbles into his classrooms at Columbia University in 1913, supported by the Gaikwad of Baroda. And one of those teachers he had was John Dewey. So I'm going to zoom in on that part of the larger picture. Other people can zoom in on other parts, of course. Ambedkar was influenced by many people. But let's go to this part of the story and ask this question. What did Ambedkar learn from John Dewey? And what creative additions or things did he add to this? Because this is a key thing. Dewey influenced Ambedkar in terms of giving him ideas, some ideas, giving him things that Ambedkar resisted and pushed against, and giving him things that Ambedkar changed and revised and made better. Influence is a tricky thing. You see, it's not just copying one to one and mimicking or imitating. So when we look at what he took from Dewey at Columbia, you can look at his transcripts preserved at places like the Kawade papers at University of Mumbai. And you see these classes listed, and you could correlate them with who taught them in the Columbia University records. And you figure out John Dewey taught 3 classes from Babasaheb's transcripts. Philosophy 231, a course on psychological ethics by Dewey, and a whole year sequence, 1 course and then 1 course. Philosophy 131 and 132 on moral and political philosophy. There's no evidence that Ambedkar was exposed to or took any education classes by John Dewey. We know that he got his first copy, the 1916 copy of that book, Democracy and Education, in London in 1917. How do we know this? You saw in that picture I showed you, he signed it. B.R. Ambedkar, London, January 6, 1917. So, he gets Dewey's thought gradually and starts developing his own thought, kind of resisting parts of it and extending parts of it gradually. So let's divide the rest of my discussion into this way of cutting things up. If you want to figure out what Ambedkar's Navayana pragmatism centers around, what's new about his pragmatism, we're going to foreground 3 themes. 1, caste as habit. 2, force as paradoxical. And 3, religion as means. I will explain each of these in turn. So the first one deals with caste as habit. You may know this way of saying, putting things from the annihilation of caste, right? We'll get to that point in a second. But if we travel back again to the fall of 1914, we see that Ambedkar took a class from John Dewey called Philosophy 231, Psychological Ethics. Now, I've since dug up the notes for this class, a variety of notes. I'm writing a book on all of this stuff, so it'll hopefully make more sense than I am now. But if you look at these notes, you can kind of piece together what John Dewey was telling students in fall of 1914. And you start to see that this class covered Dewey's particular brand of ethics, which incorporated psychology, how the human mind works, and the traditional conception of ethics, what we ought to do, right? So people often lie, but they shouldn't lie. Okay, so both of those elements are wrapped into Dewey's notion of ethics. Okay, and he also talks about a term that Dewey will talk about for the rest of his career called intelligence, right? The idea of how do we adapt to a changing environment. Pragmatism's against Sanatan or unchanging, traditions and not sources of knowledge, but it's for certain habits being intelligent or more intelligent than other habits. Dewey also foregrounded the notion of attitude and habit. Right? So we have certain mental habits beyond just physical habits. And so he's teaching his class, including Ambedkar, about the power of habits and customs, habits of whole groups of people. So when we go to 1930s, right, we can start to see deeper meaning in the things we've all read in Annihilation of Caste. In the Annihilation of Caste text, you see Ambedkar say these words: caste is a notion, it's a state of mind. To reform caste, you don't destroy physical barriers, you need a notional or conceptual or attitudinal change. So Ambedkar's taking Dewey's philosophy and psychology of ethics, which has nothing to do with caste. Dewey knew very little of caste, and applying it to a particular brand of social injustice in India. And if you look again at the Annihilation of Caste, you see this peculiar line. You might have looked past it, right? But you start to see the idea that our habits focus on terms, and we react to those terms with disgust or pleasure. And so Ambedkar says, following out this notion of psychology, all reform consists in the change in the notions, sentiments, and mental attitudes of the people towards men and things. And then he talks about names and caste names like Shudra or Avarnas, the untouchables that Ambedkar was labeled with this term. These kind of names solidify the attitude and the disgust that comes with it. And that's, the ground zero of the battle against caste. Once people are labeled with these terms and you react to them like this is where the oppression begins and where it stems from. So Ambedkar follows out this psychology and figures out a way to battle caste that's new and innovative. He also, like Dewey, puts a lot of weight on intelligence, or what he calls reflection, right? Dewey's view of reflection is we're not always thinking consciously and effortfully. That's an illusion of the rational mind. We only involve our conscious thought, reflection, when we have a crisis or a problematic situation, Dewey called it. Ambedkar takes this model and uses it in his Annihilation of Caste. He wants to create a dilemma, a crisis for the Mandal members listening to his speech, or that would have been listening to his speech, to encourage reflective thought on the problems of Hinduism. So you start to see how Ambedkar is giving a version of Navayana pragmatism that's attuned to social injustice, especially caste injustice. Now let's go to the second theme, that of force and social democracy. In that philosophy 131, 132 course, this was on the last year Ambedkar was in New York, 1915 to 1916. We can kind of get into what Ambedkar was hearing. Why? Because I've identified the notes from this. How do we know those are the exact notes? Well, they have the date on them, but you also see for 3 days, and I've circled it on this slide, Ambedkar was the substitute note taker for his classmates who took the majority of the notes. So we know he was in those classes listening to these words, listening to these lectures from Dewey. So we can piece together what he was absorbing from John Dewey and then look for its echoes or changes in his later work, right? So in those lectures, you see John Dewey talk about force can be used as energy, or force can be used as violence, a destructive thing that focuses on one end. You also see in April of 1916, John Dewey talk about the values of the French Revolution: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Now, this is a fascinating point because you all know these. Folks in India know all of these values, right? They're in the preamble to the Constitution of India. And Ambedkar was the architect of that document, and it's no mistake they're in there. I believe the best evidence we have of when he heard these was probably in April of 1916, when he first heard these from John Dewey. Now, Dewey did not put a lot of weight on these three values. Okay, so you ask any Deweyan scholar who knows a lot of Dewey about these three, the motto of the French Revolution, they're not gonna, this is not a feature, an enduring feature of Dewey's ethics or his thought. It is an enduring feature of Ambedkar's thought. So his Navayana pragmatism is different from John Dewey's pragmatism in one way, specifically the idea of being guided by these three values. Okay, now together, if you strike a nice balance among them, they're going to equate to justice. Injustice is the lack of one of these values. That's how I would explain the conceptual relationship. Now, these also are going to be features of his Navayana Buddhism. We've all seen, hopefully, we've had the pleasure of reading The Buddha and His Dhamma from 1957, Ambedkar's parting gift to the world. And you saw these things put in the context of him saying, did the Buddha have an answer to Karl Marx? Right. So his Buddhist Bible, as he called it, had liberty, equality, and fraternity built in to his notion of Buddhism. So these things are key for Ambedkar's ethics. They're key for his political thought. They're key for his Navayana pragmatism. Okay, so if you look in 1949, he gives a nice statement of how these are very important. And Damini's talk went over this too. He says social democracy is not secured unless you realize it's a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity as the principles of life. Now they're all equal. One's not more important than another, he says here. So you can't just get rid of one and focus on the other two. So notice this is social democracy, different from political democracy or economic democracy. So he has a very diverse notion of democracy, but social democracy is obviously very, very important. So let's summarize for a second before I move on. Ambedkar's Navayana pragmatism, his new vehicle in the pragmatist manifold, is going to be one that centers social democracy. It's going to have 3 defining values at the least that help guide the pursuit of this sort of community: liberty, equality, and fraternity. When you strike a balance among these, this is the state of justice. If you lack equality, but everyone has freedom, let's say, you don't have justice. Or if you lack fraternity, but everyone has the same amount of money in their bank account, justice is not there. So this is the notion of the values that guide his view of pragmatic political thought. It also concerns individuals, such as the habits of people, and communities. So Ambedkar often is telling his followers, you need to convert to recapture your dignity. At other points, like Damini's wonderful talk, explained, he's writing a document, the Constitution, that creates certain systems and institutions. So he had a varying strategy of how to enact social democracy. Some of these things focused on individuals, some of these things focused on whole systems and communities. But at the end of the day, whether it was him speaking the speech of the annihilation of caste that he wanted to deliver to the Mandala members, or when he's talking to his followers, he wants to get people in these communities to be reflective, to think about what their tradition allows them to do or how it harms them, and then make it better. That's part of his pragmatism, you see. Now let's go to the theme of force and reform. Okay, so in 1918, Ambedkar writes a small piece that most scholars of Ambedkar jump right over. It's a book review in an Indian economics journal of Bertrand Russell. He was a very important British philosopher. It was a book review of one of Russell's books, right? And, who knows where he first read this book? The book was published in 1916. But the idea is that Ambedkar thought this book was important enough that he was going to review it and to Indian audiences. So he engages this book and he writes on it. Now, what do we see in this book? If you read this book, you can find it online. I believe it's in the common domain. Russell is, wrestling with pacifism and how to avoid the ongoing tragedy of the First World War. Russell was a very important pacifist. He went to jail a few times because he, resisted war efforts, and he fought for peace in a certain activist way. So in this book, though, Russell criticizes the British and German sides of the war because each side thinks they deserve to triumph. The Germans are evil. The British are evil. We're fighting for democracy. We're fighting for the common good. We're fighting for justice, both sides say. And, Russell is very real about this. He says, when the oppressed win freedom, they're just as oppressive as their former masters. And so he's very cynical about activism and very cynical about the use of force, like the British were trying to use on the Germans and the Germans were using on the British in the fields of blood in France. And so, Ambedkar reads this and he thinks it important enough to engage with back in India. Now, what does he say about this book? This is fascinating. In this book is Ambedkar's first reference to Professor Dewey. If you read this review, you'll see him say he wants to use the language of Professor Dewey. He uses those words to analyze what Russell is talking about. Now, in this review, Ambedkar is concerned with his Indian audience seeing passivity and quietism as the best path. He may have Gandhi and the increasing popularity of those movements of resistance in India in 1918 in mind, but I have a feeling what he's thinking of is Tolstoy here, because he uses non-resistance, and this is the word you'll find in the Dewey lectures. Dewey's talking about Tolstoy's pacifism, and you don't see Gandhi ever use this, very rarely. He always uses passive resistance and then satyagraha. So, Ambedkar saw this point in Dewey's classroom about Tolstoy, and he's now taking aim at people in India that might adopt a position similar to Tolstoy. Of course, Gandhi was also taken by Tolstoy. So what does he say in this review? He draws upon Dewey to make this distinction: force is violence or force is energy. And Ambedkar, like Dewey, thinks the first one is bad. Force is violence is bad because it cuts away too many ends. The latter, however, is necessary. So if you look back at Dewey's lecture notes taken by students like Ambedkar, you see this kind of verbiage. You see John Dewey, the professor, tell his students in 1916, in the case of force, which is a means, like a way to get something done, you have words which make a distinction: energy and violence. Energy is the ability to do work. Violence connotes destructive power or force. And then you see Dewey, interestingly enough, refer to the passive inaction policy. And then he takes a few swipes or jabs at nirvana. Now, I've got another story I could tell you on another time about Dewey and Buddhism. Dewey didn't have a very high impression of Buddhism. I don't think he knew a lot about Buddhism. You see, what he was hearing about Buddhism in America was that it was life is suffering, let's give up. So definitely it is, Dewey is not an expert on Buddhism like Babasaheb was. But you can see Ambedkar probably was titillated in class hearing his professor talk about democracy, but also mentioned something that he just, said was so wrong about nirvana and Buddhism. So this is a challenge for Ambedkar to write on and fix when he gets back to India and he starts writing his own things. So let's, again, take a second to kind of summarize where we're at. You start to see that the challenge of Ambedkar's Navayana pragmatism from 1918, when he writes this book review, on, even you'll see in a second, till the end of his life, is on, one part of it kind of is always concerned with this issue. How do we get a social democracy while maintaining a balance among equality, liberty, and fraternity? It's often tempting to get to your end state, your goal, by getting rid of one of those things. Okay, but how do we get there and maintain this delicate balance? How do we use force to do it and not throw off that balance? Now let's go to theme 3. This is the last theme. Navayana Buddhism as an intelligent means of democratic reform. This is something that is obviously not there in Dewey. Dewey did not make religion a centerpiece to his educational or political or social thought. He had a book on religion in 1933 or 1934, but I have no evidence that Ambedkar read it, cited it, knew of it. So, sure, you can, hold them up and say Dewey's religious thought is like Ambedkar's, but I don't think Ambedkar had that in his head when he thought of what Dewey had or what Dewey had wrong. So Buddhism is clearly something important for Ambedkar. Now let's jump to section 4, book 4, really, of the Buddha and his Dhamma. This is a section that Ambedkar added probably around 1954, 1955. And it wasn't there in the Buddha and his Gospel, the draft of this book in 1951. So in this late revision of this book, right before he died, he adds a section on ahimsa, or nonviolence. And he connects it to Karuna and Maitri. So obviously he's reading this very Indian concept into Buddhism, or closely tying it to a variety of things in Buddhism. And, then he starts making changes, right? Then he starts kind of revising this, or kind of spinning it a certain way, or explaining it might be a better term. He says the question has been raised whether Buddha's ahimsa was absolute in its obligation or only relative. And then Ambedkar says something that stuck out to me. Was it a principle or was it only a rule? Now, this is a fascinating tell, and many people miss this, I think, probably because they just don't read the same things I do. I miss things they notice because I don't read the same things they do. But, let's pause for a second. Recall that this, reading of ahimsa is very controversial in its time, right? In 1959, the Mahabodhi Journal featured a pseudo-named review where they castigate Ambedkar's Buddha and his Dhamma. They say the whole of this book, because of things like Ambedkar's reading of ahimsa, it reads like an incitement of violence. And it should be called Ambedkar and his Dhamma, not the Buddha. But it's very harsh. The Buddhist reaction to the Buddha and his Dhamma was very harsh at the time. So let's go back. Was ahimsa a principle or was it a rule? What could Ambedkar be thinking there? And make sure your mics are muted here. I'm so boring, I can't compete with the exciting background noise. So you look at some of the books Ambedkar owned, you start to see what Babasaheb might have been thinking and building on and using. So at Siddharth College in Mumbai, I've identified 2 copies of John Dewey and James Hayden Tufts' book, Ethics. It's the 1908 edition. Both of these are 1908 editions. And in both of these copies of the book, you'll see Ambedkar's gray underlining next to one section. I've circled it with my own little circle on the slides here. You should see that circle. And so both of these sections in the book that deal with Dewey's distinction between rules and principles is noted by Ambedkar in both of his readings of 2 different books. the two different copies of the ethics. What does that one section say that Ambedkar notes? It's this: rules, this is John Dewey's writings, right? Rules are practical, they're habitual ways of doing things, but principles are intellectual. They are useful methods of judging things. They're reflective, they're intelligent, they're flexible ways of engaging an ever-changing world. Rules tell you don't kill. A principle tells you do unto others as you'd have done unto yourself. Those are Dewey's examples. So, Ambedkar sees this, and I think sees an opportunity to build into Buddhism this sort of flexibility. So if you look again at that section, on ahimsa in the Buddha and his Dhamma, you see him describe what this means for ahimsa to be a principle. He says the Buddha says, love all so that you may not wish to kill any. And that's a positive way of stating the principle of ahimsa. Okay. And then the doctrine of ahimsa does not say kill not, it says love all. And of course, we know that Ambedkar is wrestling with the Jains, where ahimsa is the top dharma, right? And ahimsa is very strict for the Jains. My first trip to India, I studied with the Jains, and I stayed in a Jain monastery for a month and had to eat Jain food, and see Jain monks walking around sweeping their path. And so the Jains are very serious about not harming any size of creature. And so Ambedkar doesn't sense in that view of ahimsa an activist social philosophy. So what does he do? His Navayana Buddhism reconstructs the idea of ahimsa as love all. Okay, it's a principle. It's not just a simple rule. So Ambedkar puts it this way, again, in Buddha and his Dhamma. To put it differently, the Buddha made a distinction between a principle and a rule. He did not make ahimsa a matter of a rule. He enunciated it as a matter of principle or a way of life. A principle leaves you freedom to act. A rule does not. A rule either breaks you or you break the rule. Now, these are fascinating additions to that simple conceptual distinction John Dewey made in 1908. Ambedkar has seen that distinction and used it to have this creative new way to look at a key concept in Buddhist or even Indian ethics, ahimsa. So Navayana Buddhism, by emphasizing tools such as ahimsa, becomes a religion of principle, right? This is what Ambedkar wanted in his Annihilation of Caste speech. He doesn't advocate Buddhism in 1936, but he says we need to convert to a religion of principle. Maybe it's in the Upanishads, maybe it's Sikhism or Buddhism. He's very ambiguous in 1936 about what religion he is thinking of. But in 1957, when the Buddha and the Dhamma is finally published, you clearly see, in 1956, when he converts, you clearly see what he thought the religion of principle was. Buddhism can give you liberty, equality, and fraternity. And how does it do this? Not through force as violence, but through force as energy, force as persuasion. So let's go to some of his last writings and some of his most intriguing writings. In the 1950s, you may have heard of this unpublished manuscript. He said it was going to be a book. It's only about 30 pages, called The Buddha or Karl Marx. It's the unpublished manuscript from the 50s. And there again, he refers to his teacher, Professor John Dewey, explicitly. And what does he say about Dewey? He repeats the same kind of basic foundational distinction about force as energy and force as means and the value of means and ends that he was toying with in 1918 and that he heard in those notes from April of 1916. So this kind of thought that Dewey had stuck with Ambedkar, and he built on it, he solved it, he resolved it, he reconstructed it, but there was still this kind of basic distinction between types of force that intrigued Ambedkar. It was useful. So, the Buddha, Ambedkar says in the 1950s, says the end always justifies the means. But the question is going to be what kind of means are justified. And then he says, as Professor Dewey pointed out, force as energy and force as violence are different things. And the achievement of an end involves the destruction of many other ends when you use violence. And that's the problematic one. So violence is problematic because it fixates on one end and sacrifices too many others. In the same essay at the bottom of the slide, you see this quote. Ambedkar says the use of force must be so regulated that it should serve as many ends as possible in destroying the evil end. And Buddha's ahimsa allowed force only as energy. So Ambedkar is using this simple distinction that had nothing to do in Dewey's mind with Buddhism, and he's using it to spell out and reconstruct and extrapolate a form of Navayana Buddhism. That's just simply fascinating. So what do we have zooming out from this and looking at the larger picture? What you see here is Ambedkar is only for using force that is intelligent or constructive and that doesn't foreclose the present and future ends of community with individuals you like or individuals you don't like. So Ambedkar is very serious about involving your opponents or your adversaries in the acts of community building. They will be your community members tomorrow, the next year. You cannot win by, as he says in 1948, giving your opponent a black eye. That's not how you create community. That's how you create enemies. So in that same manuscript, he starts talking not just about Buddhism, but about communism, right? Because the essay is about Buddha or Karl Marx. And as we know, if you read the essay, at least, Ambedkar comes out on the side of Buddhism. And, just like Dewey did not like the Russian communism that he was seeing develop over his many years before he died in 1952. So Ambedkar, the same. He says he welcomes the Russian Revolution, the communist revolution, because it aims to produce equality, but it can't be too much emphasized that in producing equality, society cannot afford to sacrifice fraternity or liberty. Equality is of no value without those two. It seems that the three can coexist only if one follows the way of the Buddha. Communism can give one, but not all. So you start to see the point Ambedkar is putting to his Navayana Buddhism. It's the sort of hope that you have for politics that things like Marxist politics don't give you, that might say we can use force, maybe even violence, to get equality in bank accounts or in rights, but it's going to sacrifice liberty, and for sure it's going to sacrifice fraternity. It will not convert anyone. So in that same essay, you see him talk about the Buddha's method. The Buddha's method was to change the mind of man. It's different from the communists of his day. And he says this when a man or a person changes their mind, right, he does it voluntarily without the use of force or compulsion. And so he says the Buddha's way was not to force people to do what they did not like to do, although it was good for them. So the Buddha's way was to alter the disposition of them. Okay. How did they do that? Well, he says in that same essay, the Buddha used persuasion. Okay, this for me starts making parts of the puzzle come together. There are various ways to read Ambedkar's puzzle, of course, but notice that he was a great orator. He gave speeches all over the place in Marathi and Hindi and English and Marathi and Hindi, combined. He gave a variety of addresses. He was a powerful speaker. John Dewey was a very boring speaker. Okay, so Ambedkar could draw a crowd. So he was always trying to persuade people in his writings or in his speeches, whether they were in Nepal or to people who were not oppressed by caste, or in Nagpur to people who were crushed by caste. He was always trying to persuade. And so you start to see that this is what he saw as valuable in the Buddha's approach. So in the Buddha and his Dhamma, when he writes the Buddha's story or what the Buddha has to give us, Ambedkar puts these words out. Cherish no anger, forget your enmities, win your enemies by love. This is the Buddhist way of life. So notice, it's not about force as violence or forcing your opponents to yield. It's about converting them. So the force and the fire of anger should be stilled, Ambedkar writes in the Buddha and his Dhamma. And then he says, importantly, enemy works evil to enemy, hater to hater. But whose is the evil? Let a man overcome anger by love. Let him overcome evil by good. So at the end of his life, at the very least, Ambedkar was convinced that his Navayana Buddhism would foreground this idea of love and charity, even to your enemies, even to your opponents, maybe even to your oppressors. So, again, zooming out at the larger picture here, we can start to see what Ambedkar's Navayana Buddhism and its social philosophy is committed to. If democracy is about creating a community animated by shared interests and respectful individuals achieving their full potential, we must not destroy existing bonds among community and create animosity. So don't create new problems by solving a current communal problem. So you must try to nurture the basis of community and accept the limits to your will and power. So occasionally, that means you won't be successful in solving some problem of social justice you set your mind out to solve. I think that's part of Ambedkar's realization. That's why he never turned to violence. Means that might have got him something he couldn't have achieved, even though he achieved so much. The idea of democracy is tough. Democracy is the task before us, as Dewey would say. So now I make a provocative claim. Might we think of Navayana Buddhism as a integral part, or maybe even as the whole of Ambedkar's Navayana pragmatism? Many people talk about Ambedkar and Dewey. I've talked about Ambedkar and Dewey and don't mention Buddhism. So, the question is, and I leave this as something to ponder more about, is it fine to talk about Ambedkar's political thought or ethics separate from his talk about Buddhism? Many people in the West will talk about his views of social democracy or talk about his views of democracy, but not mention Buddhism or the Buddha and his Dhamma. So this, I think, is a fascinating point to ponder. Is his Navayana pragmatism, his view of what it means to be a social democrat, does it necessitate the things he says about Buddhism and about the enlightened mind? So let me sum up with these, this schematic. If I had to tell you what I would put at the center or what I'd put as thematic emphases of Ambedkar's Navayana pragmatism, I would say this. One, it's a socially engaged philosophy, right? As we know from his writings on Buddhism in the 50s, he defines suffering, dukkha, as poverty or social disrespect. Different places he'll define it slightly differently. So, this is very different from just dissatisfaction due to desires, objects not being achieved. So it's a socially engaged form of Buddhism. He focuses on habits or attitudes of self or other, right? Going back as far as 1936 with the annihilation of caste. Caste is a habit, caste is an attitude, caste is a state of mind. Ambedkar also provides principles that guide our individual engagement with others in social reform. Ahimsa is not meant to be some abstract thing that fixes this class, that fixes the bourgeoisie or the proletariat or whatnot. Ahimsa is something you and I could take and try to figure out how to deal with this person on Twitter or this uncle on Facebook who posts something on our feed we don't like, right? So, it's a way of engaging someone else. Okay, and Ahimsa foregrounds love as that flexible but not always clear way of engaging others in trying to promote fraternity, a democratic value that's too often forgotten. And then lastly, I think that Ambedkar put a lot of weight, a lot of emphasis, a lot of importance on hope in organizing and persuasion, and not simply in violence or coercion. And I think this is absolutely key. And realizing this at a very deep level, and realizing the idea of fraternity is something you cannot sacrifice, means that sometimes you may not be able to win over your enemies. Try again tomorrow. And this is the tragedy of life, perhaps. Ambedkar died knowing he did not solve caste injustice, but like he says, right, he pushes the caravan forward. You can try to do the same. Don't let it go backwards, but nowhere does he demand that everyone reach a destination immediately or within their lifetime. So hopefully today I've shown you some of the potentials of thinking about Ambedkar from this vantage point of pragmatism. Now you can think of him as a Democrat, or as Professor Sukadeo Thorat so aptly does, as an economic thinker, a social policy thinker. But I have tried to contribute my perspective to this in thinking of Dr. Ambedkar as a proponent, as a creator, as an explicator of Navayana pragmatism, a kind of view of what thought and social policy have to give societies, especially those facing injustice. So I think, there are values to every story we tell about Ambedkar. But one thing I want to emphasize to you, and what I always emphasize to my friends in the West who sometimes don't know as much as they should about Ambedkar, Ambedkar is a global thinker. He is not simply an Indian figure. He is definitely not just a Dalit thinker. He is a global thinker that we should have next to people like Kant, like Plato, like Aristotle, like Gandhi. These are people that everyone in the world should know about. And I have a feeling that once you know about Dr. Ambedkar and his Navayana pragmatism and his thoughts on Buddhism, you'll find something you can apply to your situation and to your culture, whatever its forms of injustice or imperfection might be. Thank you so much for your attention. And, I welcome your comments.
Thank you very much, sir, for pouring new insight into our mind. Now we will have an interactive session. If you want, Dr. Scott, sir, or Damini, ma'am, you can unmute yourself and ask. if someone want to ask.
Or if you feel more comfortable, you can type your question in the chat, perhaps.
Yes, yes.
You know, and also for Damini too. I'm not going to answer anything on the Constitution, so she knows so much more than me about that.
Really. There is a chat. There are so many messages in chat box, but they are just wishing best wishes on this occasion.
Yes. I see someone wrote about Gandhi. I mean, yeah, this is
Yeah.
something in the West that's a challenge. Is every, you know, of my friends in academia, you know, in philosophy or communication.
Sima Kaushal has written.
Yeah, they
Amitabh
my,
Gautam
you know,
has written, Gandhi cannot be a global thinker. No, there will be another discussion. We will not discuss that.
Yes, yes. But the thing I will say about that, Tufan, is that you know, if people know of India in many parts of the fields I'm in, they know of Gandhi, and I think that's a shame. They should know of perhaps Gandhi and Ambedkar, because they have a very perspectival view of what India has to offer.
They must be studied comparatively.
Yes, yes.
If someone asks, they can proceed by unmuting
Hello.
themselves. Hello.
Hello.
Oh, yes.
Dipankar.
Professor Scott. Hello.
You are audible.
Yeah.
Dipankar.
So Professor Scott is like associate professor of media and communication. So I want to ask him that what role has it played in regards of Gandhi and Ambedkar in constructing the image of national leadership? What role has media and communication played in that?
Yes. You know, I'm no expert on Gandhi, but Ambedkar clearly knew how to use media. You know, he was smart. He wasn't manipulative, but, you know, because he definitely did not dominate the mainstream media. This is why he formed Muk Nayak and Samata, you know, and these other, you know, newspapers, because the Dalit cause was not getting represented in the mainstream media. And so Ambedkar was smart. He, you know, found ways to do this. One of my last trips to India, a kind friend introduced me to Mr. Bimrao Ambedkar, his grandson, and I, you know, got to see the printing press Babasaheb brought back in 1932 from the Roundtable conferences. Remember, he bought a printing press in London and had it shipped back to India. And so that printing press still exists, you know, and so it's fascinating. You know, he couldn't get people to publish the journalism that his people, the Dalits, needed. So he did what it took to get the technology to make this. Now, today, he would have started a website. You know, there's a range of wonderful Dalit and Dalit Bahujan websites out there, Forward Press, Roundtable India. You know, there's a variety of them. And so this is a new ecosystem. So yes, Ambedkar was smart about media, and the Dalit cause today and the Ambedkarite cause is being very smart about media as well, I think.
Also, Professor, when can we expect your book to come?
That's the number one question everyone has, and also I have. I've got now my problem is I have 130,000 words over here on my desk, and I've got to trim them down a little bit. So hopefully in a year. But I've realized that there's so much to say here. I'm going to have to write a second book on the Buddha and his Dhamma and Ambedkar's view of Buddhism in the 1950s. So this just goes to show you that once you get into Dr. Ambedkar, you can never get out. His thought is so complex.
Also, Professor, your chamber looks amazing, like all the pictures of Dr. Ambedkar and statues.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Jai Bhim, my friend. Every time I go to India, I make sure and fill my luggage. Usually I take Dewey books there and give away, because it's hard to get Dewey's works in India, you know, the books at least. And when I come back, I fill my luggage with statues of Babasaheb from Chaityabhumi and other places. You just can't find this stuff in the US. It's a shame.
Also, Professor, as we have this center in Ambedkar College, Bramhapuri, Dr. Ambedkar Thoughts, can we do a crossover or some engagement between you and our center of Dr. Ambedkar Thoughts, where we can collide John Dewey and Dr. Ambedkar?
Yes, send me an email, or you could you see me on Twitter. You could send me a direct message or whatnot, or Tufanji will know how to get in touch with me. But yes, I'm looking for more and more areas to collaborate with in India, because I think America can learn a lot from Ambedkar and John Dewey. There's interesting things to talk about in terms of democracy and education, in India. I see one of the other questions is on the reflection of democracy and in the current scenario. India is a complex place. And as you know, regardless of COVID, there's a lot of issues going on with protest. I mean, one thing that I think Ambedkar would be sensitive to is that in the ways of pursuing courses of activism, you have to make sure and not make enemies permanent enemies. So this is the challenge in America. This is also the challenge in India. How do different political parties cooperate at some level? Whether that's the BJP or some other party, or whether in the US, which I'm more familiar with, how do Republicans ever get along with Democrats in the challenges of governing? That I don't think anyone, including Ambedkar, has an easy answer to, but it's clearly the challenge.
Again,
Thank you, Professor.
if anyone can ask. Hello.
Yes.
Scott, sir, everyone is satisfied with your speech.
Well,
No
thank
one-
you. Thank you for
None-
organizing this, Tufan, and the Dr. Ambedkar College. Thank you so much for
No,
organizing
our principal
it.
and our secretary, sir, because of their motivation, this program is going on.
Yes.
Our principal, due to health reason, he could not join this program. And one of our guests, Maitre, sir, he could also not get join because of health reason, because of corona pandemic.
Yes.
Sir,
Yes. And some.
uh,
Yes. Go ahead.
please proceed.
Oh, I was going to say, this has its benefits. I have not been to the Bramhapuri campus, so
Yeah.
unless I stumble through there, this is a wonderful way to get to meet each other and talk about Ambedkar. So until I can get to India and talk to you in person, this is a wonderful substitute.
Also, Professor, next
Yes.
time you visit India, do come to our campus in Bramhapuri.
Okay, excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so, and now, this is now with this talk, I have so many friends in India. I'll have to stay there for a month to see everyone. But this is, there's so many people that know so much about Ambedkar and caste. And so I love going there and listening. And then I also, will say a few things that I have in my mind, but it's a wonderful experience and a wonderful exchange.
Also, Professor, the district which we come from, like Bramhapuri, it falls in Chandrapur district. It has a rich history of Ambedkarite movement. So you surely should visit Bramhapuri once and Chandrapur.
Okay, excellent. This is wonderful. And your college and your town are close to Nagpur, right?
Yes, it's like 2-hour drive.
Okay.
And you don't need to
Wonderful.
bother. We'll do all the necessary arrangement, Professor.
Yes. Well, I hope everyone, on the Zoom screen here is staying safe in India. I know America,
Yes.
on my WhatsApp, usually my Indian friends are writing me worrying about the state of Texas and coronavirus, and I'm writing them worried about Maharashtra and coronavirus. So hopefully everyone's staying safe.
Also, Professor, the second conversion ceremony, like on 16th of October 1956, it happened in Chandrapur. So this land has an equal importance as Nagpur.
Okay, wonderful. And now you say that was on October 16th.
Yeah, and our founding member of Dr. Ambedkar Education Society, Bramhapuri, was the person who organized that conversion ceremony, Barrister Rajabhau Khobragare.
Okay, excellent. Yes, I did not know that.
Professor, few months back, I sent you a letter on WhatsApp where actually I co-authored that article with Mangesh Dahiwale, and I sent it to you on WhatsApp, where Barrister talks about the Afro-American problems of USA.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I get so much stuff on WhatsApp. It's hard to keep up with it. But yes, I'll have to look for it. But yeah,
I got your number from Mangesh sir and I sent you one also. Yeah.
Yes, Mangesh is doing wonderful work there in Nagpur and Pune, wherever he's at nowadays. He changes around, but it's yes, I was thrilled to learn about the activist Buddhism that they were doing at Nagloka and elsewhere.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
I think we must conclude interactive session. Now I would like to request Dr. Devesh Kamble sir, Chairperson and the Secretary of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Education Society, Chanda, Bramhapuri, and the convener of this webinar to share his views. Devesh sir.
First of all, I would like to wish. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
First of all, I would like to wish everybody on the event of 14th October, 130th birth anniversary of Dr. Ambedkar. I would also like to thank Dr. Scott for the keynote address to this event, and Damini for enlightening us on the very important topic of Constitution of India, and all the friends who are responsible making this event success. Actually, I would also like to thank Mangesh for making this conference an international event where Dr. Stroud has agreed to join and guide us on the very topic of what is new in Dr. Ambedkar's Buddhism. After hearing Damini and Dr. Scott, I came to know that though the topic or the heading of their talk was different, but the content is similar. What is new in what is democracy? It is way of associated living based on the principle liberty, equality, and fraternity. What Dr. Stroud he said, what is new in Buddhism, Dr. Ambedkar's Buddhism, and what is difference between Buddhism and communism? The use of force, violence, which destroys fraternity, and where there is no fraternity in a society, there cannot be an associated living, there cannot be an equality among the residents, there cannot be liberty to all available, and the society, the social change of society without liberty, equality, and fraternity cannot be a democratic society. And in that society, in this context, Dr. Scott has related very effectively Navayana Buddhism and democracy, and social democracy, and pragmatism of Dr. John Dewey. He also, through his slideshow, has enlightened us on various matters like caste is a habit, caste is a state of mind, and caste is a mental problem. And when there is any mental problem, you have to go to the psychological treatment, and that psychological treatment is psychotherapy, which I think Buddhism is a better psychotherapy to construct or reconstruct the society on the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The use of force, violence is not allowed or not important in Buddhism, but pose as an energy for use of reconstructive purpose to spread love among all the people is what Dr. Ambedkar wants. Caste is a notion, it is a state of mind. It is a stereotypical thinking or classifying all the population into various segments which do not have access to each other, and it is also letting down everybody. It is also letting down some and elevating others. Therefore, force and social democracy are two different. What Buddhism of the Navayana views the force as
English
force used for a constructive purpose and not a destructive purpose. What communism thinks? Communism accepts violence. What Buddhism do? It rejects violence. It only wants that love all being. If you love all being, then violence is not a rule, but it is a matter of principle. And principles, what constitute a religion, and religion based on rules is not effective in inculcating the values necessary for life. Social democracy is to maintain a balance between liberty, equality, and equity. And these five principles are very important to have a society based on democracy. It is not, democracy is not a political tool, it is a social tool. A democracy is a way of life. It is respecting the views, lives, the rights of all individuals. Ahimsa, what Jainism thinks and what Buddhism thinks. Ahimsa to Buddhism is karuna and mercy. And ahimsa is not an absolute, as it is a principle and not a rule. Love all is the principle. So religion based on principles is more important than religion based on rules, and a society based on principles is more important than society based on rules. Buddhism, what Dr. Scott has said, that it is a change of mind, not by force, but by spreading knowledge, by enlightening them, by informing them, by giving them choice. So, a society is a well-informed, well-educated, well-enlightened society, and therefore that society is a democratic society. The what Damini has said that on 26th November 1950, Dr. Ambedkar in his last speech says that a society, we are entering into a society where, or we are entering into an era where in political life we are equal, but in social and economic life we are unequal. It is a life of contradictions. And in this, and if this continues for long, the person who are oppressed, who are depressed, or who are exploited will blow away this cover of democracy, and again we will be a slave society. So everybody should strive, everybody should, or everybody should strive for having a society based on liberty, equality, and fraternity on all walks of life, political, social, economical, cultural. And also strive for making a society based on knowledge, science, enlightenment, well informed. Nothing should be hidden. Everybody should have a choice. There should be love among everyone, every individual, every subject of the society. And in only such society, we can have democracy in all walks of life, that is social, economical, political. Or else now we are having an electoral, there is a talk that India is no longer a democracy. It is only an electoral democracy where government is chosen by majority. Only election that is important, and society, the values of the principles of love, liberty, equality, and fraternity. On these counts, our society is degraded. So on this day, when we have two eminent speakers, Damini, Kain, and Dr. Stroud, they have enlightened us and they have shaken our value system. They have given a new insight into what a society should be and what society shall strive for. Communism, democracy, parliamentary democracy, which is based on majority. So, what Dr. Ambedkar said, that walking in the right direction is more important than walking with the herd. So, walking alone is also walking is good than walking in a wrong direction. So, all the thinkers, it is a message from today's uh, seminar or webinar that everybody should strive for excellence, should strive for contributing their part to have a society based on knowledge, science, enlightenment, information, and have an open system wherein in that system only a society based on liberty, equality, and fraternity shadow. We should also be disillusioned from communism, and we should strongly hold on the principles of democracy. I thank all, all the participants and also our eminent guests, Dr. Scott and Damini, for being a part of this wonderful session. Yogesh was the third guest, but he could not join because of his ill health, and our principal, Dr. Huck, who was also the introducer of today's session, could not join because he is also admitted in the hospital with several difficulties that our technical team, which used to conduct our session, is also down with COVID, and with some amateurs we have to go forward with this session. But still, I think this session this webinar has contributed in developing a new thinking, a new insight into the philosophy of Dr. Ambedkar, and a new way that Buddhism and democracy are nothing but the same thing. And we shall strive to uphold the principles of democracy and also strive that principles should not be converted into rules. Thank you very much. With this, I conclude. Jai Hind.
Thank you very much, sir. As sir has pointed out, our technical expert, Dr. Umesh Herde sir, he was not feeling well, and that's why one of my colleague, our faculty, Dr. Nandeshwar sir, and I handle all the procedure. And to be frank, we are not that much expert in this technique, but we handled it. Dr. Stout sir,
Yes.
sorry for disturbances which might have disturbed you. And
Perfect.
On behalf of chairman of this webinar and our secretary, I just request that we will have MOU between your university and our college based on Ambedkarite studies. I just request in coming days, we will have an MOU.
Yes, yes, we'll have to look into this stuff. Yeah, a lot of this is above my head.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for inviting me, Tufan, and everyone at Dr. Ambedkar College. And I look forward to seeing you in the future. And everyone stay safe.
Thank you, sir.
Same to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim.
Jai Hind. Jai Hind.
Now I call upon Dr. Snigdha Kamble, ma'am, Honorable Member of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Education Society and Head of the Department of Sociology to conduct vote of thanks.
Thank you, Tufan sir. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Shriram Kawade sir, officiating Pro Vice Chancellor of Gondwana University, Gadchiroli, the inaugurator of this webinar, for giving his valuable time. I also thank Dr.Devesh Kamble sir, Secretary of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Education Society, Chanda, Bramhapuri, and HOD of Dr. Ambedkar Thought, for encouraging us and giving his precious time and sharing his thoughts. I also thankful to Dr. Azizul Haq sir, our principal and convener of the webinar, for motivating us to conduct this webinar. I also thank to Dipankar Kamble, member of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Education Society, Chanda, Brahmapuri, for delivering an introductory speech. I extend a deep sense of gratitude towards Professor Scott for giving us an opportunity to listen him on the topic, what is new in Dr. Ambedkar's Buddhism and in his pragmatism. I also extend my deep sense of gratitude towards Damini, who delivered a speech on the topic, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and the Constitution of India. I also thank to Tufan Avtade sir, anchor of this webinar, as well as coordinator of the Department of Cultural Activities, who take initiative to conduct this event successfully. As well as I also thankful to Dr. Nandeshwar sir and Umesh Herde sir and all the faculties of our college for their kind assistance. Last but not the least, I am very thankful to all the participants for patiently listening this webinar. Thank you very much for making this webinar a grand success. Participants are requested to submit their feedback. The link of feedback form is posted on WhatsApp groups. The certificates will be issued to the participants within a week. With the permission of Chairman, I declare here that this webinar is concluded. Thank you very much once again and take care. Stay safe.